Welcome to our Ask an Expert show, where I invite a fellow professional in the US expat cross-border space to come in and talk to me about the issues we think Americans who are considering moving to Europe need to be aware of if they're going to thrive there. My guest today is Paula Jones. Paula is the principal and founder of Jones Estate Group, a law firm based in Philadelphia serving clients across the US and internationally in matters of international and domestic estate law. Paula is an American, although she is now also a Brit, and she helps international people to set up estate plans that protect them and their families in the US without inadvertently triggering adverse consequences outside the US. And today we're going to talk about the kind of estate planning Americans who are moving to Europe need to undertake and what kind of things they need to avoid. So, without further ado, let's get into this. Hi, Paula. Welcome to Move to Europe.
Hi, Richard. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank
Thrilled
you.
to be
Thank
here.
you. Excellent. So, if you wouldn't mind telling everyone a little bit about yourself, maybe an abridged version of your story.
So I've been practicing law for 25 years and pretty much within the first year of practicing in a traditional, largely domestic estate practice, there was an international issue, an international client who came in and the light bulb went off and I said, these are my people and these are the situations that I want to work with. So the past 25 years, I've built my practice of U.S. people, anyone with a U.S. plus a non-U.S. component. I do estate work for them. And all of it was really just a ruse for me to be able to travel to as many places as possible and to deal with people from all different countries on a daily basis.
Right. So, I didn't know that. So, listeners won't know, you and I have done a podcast together before, and I didn't know it stemmed from someone coming in, an expat or an immigrant coming in. Is that?
It was a U.S. person, but a green card holder, right? So a couple had lived in the U.S. for 30 years.
Uh-huh.
The husband, unfortunately, unexpectedly passed away at a
Uh-huh.
fairly young age. They had not done any estate planning. And what they had learned from they had been to two attorneys and an accountant who did not realize or know what to do about the fact that there is a very small, negligible marital deduction when someone is not a U.S. citizen and they are leaving things to their spouse. And this poor woman who was going through a terrible grief anyway, and on top of it, at that time, she was looking at a $400,000 federal estate tax bill.
Yikes.
And she was running around trying to figure out, can someone do something about this? I was a very new attorney, and one of the partners turned to me and said, go figure this out. And I thought it was a test, that because I was a new attorney, he was waiting to find out if I would figure it out. And I thought he knew the answer. I learned very quickly he did not know the answer. Uh, and I figured it out. And I said, oh, we could do a postmortem QDOT. And and you
I didn't know you could do that. I mean, I'm familiar
yes,
with
you can do a
QDOTs.
yes, you can do a
Ah.
postmortem QDOT. She could have also run out and become a citizen if the, immigration lines at the consulate and everything were not so long. She was from India originally. There is not dual citizenship there, so she would have had to have give up the Indian citizenship and all things that go with it in order to be dual, so that was not a good option for her. So we did a postmortem QDOT.
Is that still the
And
case? Do you know with India?
yes, from my next door neighbor who's a very good friend who is from India and who became a citizen within the last 10 years. Yes, within the last 10 years, I know at least that was still the case.
And then it made them and then they gave up their Indian citizenship.
She did, yes.
That's a brutal, brutal thing to force people to do.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's one thing making people do that when they're going to any other country but the US. But with the US, with its exit tax and things like that, make it a perilous situation where you can be caught between giving up your original citizenship
yeah,
or living with the risk of being on a green card. And there is a risk of living on a green card.
right,
You've just identified one. But summarily losing your status and being subject to the exit tax,
right,
bad
right.
things can happen.
Bad things can happen, yes, yes. Sometimes a change in immigration status is an estate planning technique, you
Mm.
know? And then other times it isn't because it can be now, in the case of my good friend and neighbor, she did it on purpose. She's been settled
Mm.
here, she's gonna stay here, and so she did that, and she just knew her mother would be upset, so we eventually broke it to her. But other people, it's a planning choice where they go, "Okay, here are my choices, here are the risks." Now, if this client that I'm referring to had come in and we had done planning for all of this, then it would have all been okay, right? But most people don't do very much planning. And so, it's normal. Thankfully, we had a solution. I figured out the solution and said, "You don't owe $400,000. You owe 0." That was a really great meeting, a big relief. And but what it also did was it made it very apparent to me that she had gone to 2 attorneys and an accountant, and they did not know that that was an option for her. They knew enough to know that there was a problem, but they didn't know what to do about it. And that's an important thing. And there isn't a lot of, focus on this area. Fortunately, there's been more in the last 25 years, more of a focus on that. And this is just the way the world is, and it will continue to be that we will just have more and more multinationals, that have our I become one myself. I got my UK citizenship, a few years ago. I'm now a dual citizen and all of the things that go with that, So I'm very like my clients. I also grew up in a family. We had 5 people from 4 different countries. And so growing up in a multinational environment was something that I was very used to. That was the norm for me, and it is interesting, that when I meet with other clients, we understand each other. We sort of come
Mm.
from the same place, and so that's
Mm.
why, I really knew that, "Oh, these are the clients that I wanna work with."
These are my people.
So, these are my
I was
people, yeah.
I was about to ask you a question, but you've just answered it. I was gonna ask you, so was it the interest in solving this puzzle that no one had an answer to,
Mhm.
that really led you down this path? Or was it you thought, "Ah, these are my people," because everyone, I just told you I've done 4 podcasts this week, all with expat advisors, and it's universal. We love working with expats. Specifically, we've all worked with not working with expats, and now we all work with expats, and we all love expats because the profile of an expat is they're adventurous, they're open-minded, they're
Right.
they're bold, they're risk takers, and generally also humble is probably the wrong word. Open-minded is the better word, and I like that profile of person. I enjoy working with that profile of person.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that I myself have always experienced growing up in, my original family being made up of lots of different people from different countries is, the the response to that is sometimes, "Oh, that's interesting." But all too many times, "That's weird, that's strange, that's a foreign concept to me." And that's disappointing to me that we do bump into this America-centric attitude, that's always been there. This misunderstanding about people who move about the world, for all kinds of different reasons. And a lot of it is because they are going for opportunity. They're adventurous. They just love, they went on a trip and they fell in love. I mean, one of my earlier clients, she was an older woman. She loved to travel. She loved Spain. She just went on a trip there. She completely fell in love with it. She wound up buying a house. She spent some time in Spain. She made friends. I mean, this is someone who's just loving life,
Mm, mm,
and has a very open mind. Travel, I'm a huge traveler. It truly does broaden one's horizons, literally. I mean, I just went to a conference of attorneys for the International Bar Association in London the first week of March, and, it's for all of us who work with in private client, who, working with, individuals generally, higher net worth individuals. And we're all standing around talking. It's about 40 countries are represented, and there's only 300 attendees at this conference. And so I love that conference because we all just sit around and talk to one another. What's going on in your country? What's going on in your country? We compare notes, we sympathize, we have this kind of program. What kind of program do you have? I mean, it literally just My horizons are broadened. We do things this way. We handle that problem that way. We have this problem, we don't have that problem,
Mhm.
and at the same time, we can compare all these differences, and at the same time, underneath, people are people. And we also what comes out of that is our incredible commonalities, those deep down things that make us all human and all connected and what we all want is also a very, very sort of encouraging, affirming feeling that I get, when I go on that trip.
So true, but you know what I'm also thinking? I'm thinking people are people, which means that no matter what we do, Paula, no matter how many podcasts we do, how many blogs we do, how many events we speak at, there will always be people who try to DIY this, who try to
Oh,
DIY
yeah.
there. But people with plenty of money who should know better will try to DIY from an immigration perspective, a tax
Yep.
perspective, an estate planning perspective, and eventually we'll get a call from those people, and we'll have to help them unwind it all. But
Yes,
that
yes.
no matter what we do, however much we put it into the world, it's still going to happen. It blows my
That
mind.
is so true, that is so true. So I'm, a member of a couple of attorney groups, and there's a mug, and it says, "Please don't confuse your Google search with my law degree." Okay?
Okay,
And
yes.
we
Oh, I like
all,
that.
like, once a month, someone posts that and says, "I had this client, and here's what they did," and we all sympathize with it. Yes, there will always be people who think that they know better, and some people just insist on learning the hard way, and that's okay. You can learn the hard way too.
Well, okay, so you set me up beautifully as well. This podcast is about tr trying to reach those people who are not closed-minded and who would be interested in an adventure abroad, but it's just too big a you just no one does it, right? No one in the world does it. How do you
Yeah.
even start considering something like that? And
Mhm.
I want to inspire more Americans to take that leap. I believe people come to America to change their lives financially. But I also believe there's a tremendous opportunity for already successful Americans who are, maybe towards the end of their career to change the quality of their lives. Not necessarily
Yep.
just at retirement, but before retirement, rather than just
Mhm.
slogging it
Mhm.
out for another 10 years. Go and just try a sample a different way of life. Because Europe is far from perfect. And in many ways, the US is far superior to Europe, but there's a different way of life. There's a reason it's a Dolce Vita, right? That it's just a different way of life,
Yes.
and it appeals to a lot of people. Being surrounded by that culture, that history, that food, that wine, I'm
Mhm.
talking myself into it here. And I want to
No, I
inspire people to that, and then
yeah.
help them, equip them to doing anything foreign when you're US connected has got
Mhm.
serious landmines. There's opportunities, and I want to help people take advantage of the opportunities, but there's also serious landmines, expensive landmines. And
Yeah.
if you can be reached, I don't want you to DIY it. I want you to, and I don't want you to learn the hard way. I want to help people try and I want to reach them before they make the mistakes.
Yep, yep. No, I absolutely. And so one of the concepts that I think most US people do understand at this point is and they know this because they file their income taxes each year. If they have any connection outside the United States, what they have realized is that the US taxes a US citizen or a US resident on worldwide income. So most people uh, have already figured that out, or will soon figure that out. Right? We file our income taxes once a year, and so it's kind of the most immediate consequence that someone who has gone from just U.S. to U.S. plus something else is going to experience. It's going to be in the income tax. So what I do is the estate tax and gift tax and basically transferring of assets. Um, so everyone kind of knows the income tax, but one of the landmines is any estate or gift tax consequences of that. Because even folks who are purely domestic don't necessarily understand that there's a federal estate tax, you
Hmm.
know? And how does it affect them and all of those things. And so that's one of the things that, hopefully if someone is a planner and they're not like DIYing it and they kind of make a call to at least investigate what they might need to consider, their citizenship is going to follow them wherever they go. So the federal estate tax reaches well beyond its borders and it taxes any U.S. citizen on their worldwide assets at the time of their death. So it doesn't care where the person is and it doesn't care where the asset is. It brings it all in. Now, That sounds scary at first, but now I'm gonna say there's also an extremely high exemption amount right now. In 2025, it is 13.99 million per person. So
Wow.
a lot of people just took a huge sigh of relief and said, "Oh, well, that doesn't apply to me." Okay, and they're right. It doesn't apply to very many people. It's kind of a small percentage of the U.S. population who has a net worth of about 14 million. Okay, that number is going down in 2026. It's an automatic thing. The existing law was around for 10 years. It automatically sunsets. We call it sunsetting. January 1st to 2026, the new law comes into effect. It essentially goes back to what the law was 10 years prior. And that number is still pretty high. It's going to be somewhere between 6 and 7 million. And we need to do the math and inflation indexing and blah, blah, blah. But the point is, it's somewhere between 6 and 7 million. So for a lot of people out there, federal estate tax sort of isn't necessarily an issue. Okay. But now more people just maybe perked up and said, okay, I don't have 14 million, but like, yeah, combined, we probably have maybe a smidge over 6 or something like that.
Mhm.
So now it's something that they do need to be aware of, that even if they leave, even if they take all their assets with them, like out of the
Mhm.
US, if you're a citizen, you're still pulled into that. Can planning be done? Of course, but that's a question that people need to ask kind of before they make that leap. It's just something for them to keep in mind. Um,
Do people have
you know.
state issues as well? I know some states have inheritance taxes and stuff. Can that also follow you?
So state stuff generally does not follow you because states need you to be resident in the state in order for their estate or inheritance tax to apply. So yeah, a smattering of the 50 states have either an estate tax or an inheritance tax at the state level. I'll give an example. Pennsylvania has an inheritance tax. Anything going to a spouse is 0. Anything going to children is a flat 4.5%. No exemption amounts there. Every state is a little bit different. Some
Mhm.
just don't have any
Mhm.
inheritance tax at all. Florida doesn't. I don't believe Texas does either. I don't think New Hampshire does. And a few others don't. Um, the best I can say is some states really do like to hang on to people and their residents, in the same way that some countries do too. So New York, for instance, is kind of known for even if you physically leave and you move to another state, they can sometimes try to make arguments that you're really still there, that you kind of intended to return or you didn't completely leave or whatever. So New York is kind of one. It's a high tax state. We know that, and they kind of like to kind of hang on to people. By contrast, Florida, and I'm not a Florida attorney, but we, kind of deal enough with people here on the East Coast who have a connection to Florida. But Florida tends to not want someone to be resident because so many people are trying to say that they're Florida resident. That's a very, very popular place to go. No state level of income tax, no inheritance or estate tax in Florida, So a lot of people are trying to
Of
say that
course.
Florida is where they reside. And Florida has like this whole checklist, like you need to be doing all these things and showing all this in order for us to really think that you're resident,
Oh,
you
really? And
know?
then would a state
Yeah.
like New York accept that? Would New York accept Florida if you completed that checklist and you got accepted into Florida, would New York accept that as proof that
New York has their own test under
of
under
course
New
they
York
do.
law.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of
Yeah, yeah.
course they
We
do.
had a matter a few years ago where someone in New York all they had in New York was a timeshare because you can get a timeshare in Manhattan, right? For people who like to go to New York and they don't wanna pay the high hotel rates or whatever. And they go enough where they go, "Okay, yeah, I'll take this timeshare and we'll kinda spend our normal amount of time each year there." And, um, and New York tried to claim that someone owning a timeshare meant that they were a resident in New York. Now they lost, okay, but it was a fight. But it was a
Really?
fight. Yeah.
And does that create a precedent then, or is that are you gonna have to would that have to fight
It
every
does,
time?
sure. It was a case, yeah, it was a case, and they ruled against, New York, in that case, and so that is good precedent, but it's also a good example to say, "Wow,"
Yeah,
that's reaching pretty far to say, "Oh, no, you're still one of us," whereas
yeah.
Florida's kinda trying to kick people out.
I'm gonna take a wild stab in the dark here, but I presume California is the same.
So and I generally don't touch California because there's
Mm.
so many, they do things in their own way. It's also a community property state. I don't know anything about community property, and so I kind of know where I'm not where I shouldn't dabble. But California is a high tax state, so it's possible. It's possible. There's certainly a motivation for someone to say, you're us. We get to tax you. They don't get to tax you. We get to tax you.
Mm-hmm.
And it just reflects the mobility, even certainly between the US and other countries, but even within the states, we have a different kind of society now. We have a portion of our society who lives in two states, and that's normal. Well, we have our main house here, and then we have our vacation home there. And now that we can, work remotely, and that's more accepted, COVID sort of it was on the rise anyway, and COVID really accelerated this concept of working remotely, where people who lived in New York said, I am going to go to my house in Florida, and that's now going to be my primary residence because I'm going to be working from there, you know? And so they have tried to make that switch of saying, I'm no longer New York resident, I'm Florida resident, you know? Well, people on a global scale are doing the same thing in countries, you know? Well, I lived in the US, but we also have a home in France, so maybe it's better for me to claim, and I can work from anywhere, so maybe it's better for me to claim that I'm actually living in France, so maybe I'll go do that. And should I do that? Well, let's do the math and figure it out,
Mm.
you know? So that's why, people come to me and they go, I might wanna move to Spain. I might wanna I have a couple, or I have a couple, certainly taking advantage of the, Portugal visa program.
Mm-hmm.
Portugal did a great job in attracting a lot of wealthy folks to come and live in Portugal, to buy a home there, to kind of settle in there and sort of bring a boost to the economy. That helped out. So I have US citizens living in Portugal. They're not entirely sure, they after I think it's 5 years or something, they kind of get to be permanently there, or they get residency status. And they're it's a better, pace of life for them, as you said. Europe tends to be more attractive as far as just the pace of life and not this rush, 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 work, 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 work all the time. And so they are enjoying themselves there. They can work remotely. They're working less, but they're working remotely. Um, and they're in Portugal. So their question is, okay, now what do we do? As far as our estate plan goes, what do we do? Well, they're still a US citizen,
Well,
right?
actually, Paula, quick question.
Yeah.
Should they have done something before they left?
Oh, of course. Of course. The general rule in any kind of estate law is you should have done this a year ago.
Oh, really? It's
You
just
know, you
okay.
you should have called me a year ago,
Yeah,
whatever it
okay.
is. You know, even just to, and I do. I mean, I certainly get calls from people who are saying, and I literally just got a call this week from someone who says, we may, in thinking of the next 5 to 10 years of our life, we want to slow down a little bit work-wise. We want to be spending more time in in another country. Um, and can you run the math on that for us to see what are our most viable options? So just a smattering of the issues that we wanna think about. If they're really changing their immigration status, is there gonna be an exit tax for them?
Mm.
If they were here on a green card, are they giving up the green card? Will they be deemed to have given up the green card even if they don't want to? What do they need to do on an immigration standpoint? So I don't do immigration, but I work with immigration attorneys. Like I said, change in immigration can be an estate planning technique, but we want to know from the immigration folks the latest and greatest information of what are our options there and what the consequences might be.
Do you get involved in the exit tax side of things?
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely, sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think this issue has the potential to be devastating because this is one that can be planned away. But
Yes.
if you unwittingly lose your green card, you've left
Mhm.
the country, you've thought, I'll just keep it in case I want to go back. You haven't spoken to someone like you or me who says, do not do that. Um,
Mhm.
and you go to the border and you voluntarily relinquish it, which you should never do either. I understand when you come back in, and you are deemed to have exited, and the exit tax applies a day before you gave up your green card. They're just going
Yeah.
to assume they're going to do a calculation that assumes you sold all your assets, even
Yep.
if you didn't, worldwide, and they're going to apply a phantom tax to that.
Yep.
and you're gonna get it's gonna be a huge tax bill, but you haven't actually sold any of this stuff.
Right.
Meanwhile, you're resident in another country. If
Right.
if you have to sell these assets to pay this bill to the US, or you come to sell them later on, you're not going to get any relief for that phantom tax, as I understand it, because it's there's nowhere in the treaty that gives you relief for that for the exit tax. So you're essentially going to get taxed twice without relief.
Yeah, the exit tax absolutely can be planned around. But
Yeah.
you're right. So I had a client that had been wanting to expatriate, and then from the U.S. to Canada, and then during COVID, kind of got trapped in Canada, right? Because of COVID, had gone back to Canada because had always kept a home there, and had kind of gone back and forth. Kind of got stuck in in the house in Canada because they literally were on lockdown for in a different way than we were in the US, right? Like, they could not leave
Oh, really?
certain
Right.
regions. Yeah. I had some, clients in Ireland as well where they said, like, "We literally cannot l leave our region. They won't let us out, and so we are in lockdown here." These are
Wow.
just reports from what I've heard people say, and I kinda thought, "Wow, that really is different." We say we're in lockdown and that you shouldn't go here or there,
Yeah.
but there's no one actually enforcing that here in the US, right? People were driving wherever they wanted to go, as
What a
usual.
wild
But
time. What
it's a yes.
what a wild time that was.
It
I'm
really
so
was very strange,
we're still
very
we're
strange.
still we're still suffering the aftershocks, I believe, all
Yeah,
around us,
yeah,
socially,
yeah,
politically, financially.
yeah.
It's still maybe for
Yeah.
years.
So this, Canadian person's kinda got caught in Canada and had wanted to expatriate anyway. The green card was expiring over the time that they could not get back into the US, and so they were wondering, "Am am I
Yeah.
am I going to be deemed to have abandoned my green card because I wasn't back in the US when I should be? And if so, did my expatriation and the imposition of the exit tax happen to me, right? Without
Mm.
me being able to do anything about it?" And so we were kind of planning around this exit tax. And this was a client who called 2 years in advance and said, "Yeah, I wanna do this," and had started to put things in place. It all turned out fine, uh, but who would have thought that, this person was actually caught in something where they were, like, physically unable to move from where they were to get back to the United States to renew the green card, so that they could, expatriate exactly when they wanted to after all the planning had been done.
And people don't think
So
about these things, but that's one. I mean, no one could have foreseen that. But you could be in an accident.
yeah, right.
You could get detained overseas for some reason. Who knows? There's any number of things that could happen.
There's nervousness now because we have a president who likes to do travel bans from various countries,
Hmm.
and, we saw it the last time where people got trapped outside and kinda couldn't make it back. That's yeah, that is can be a very anxiety provoking, situation for people to be in. So, pre-planning is good. You never really know, how things are gonna wind up, but yeah, so if someone says, "Okay, yes, I really do wanna go and live in Spain or wherever," um, they need to take a look at an exit tax and see, does this apply? If it does, leave enough time to put the planning in place so that that exit tax does not get triggered. Um, and then once they're overseas, if you remain a US citizen, that federal estate tax, transferring assets around, things like that, they still apply. We also wanna make sure, so I have clients who American through and through. Everything has always been American, all the assets, everything. They are both of Italian descent. They love Italy. Who doesn't love Italy? They have now purchased an apartment in Rome. They
Nice.
love spending more time in Rome. This is, they're in their late 50s. They're sort of getting to, like, "Oh, we spent the entire month of August there. We are just loving it. It's great." Um, and so now their question is, should we Italy is offering a flat tax
Uh-huh.
program, and, I think it's something like, don't quote me on it, but something like $200,000 flat tax. These are high earners, and, so it would be a big savings for them. So they're asking, should we change our residence to Italy? and not be resident in the United States anymore. They're not giving up the citizenship, they're just changing the residency. So the question is, we know for estate tax purposes what their life is going to look like as US citizens. Our question is, we get on with Italian counsel and we say, tell us what the ramifications are for Italian residents in relation to income, estate, transferring assets around. And then we have to coordinate those two things. You know? So right now, before they've made the move, while they're still in US, they absolutely need a separate Italian will for that Rome apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're working with Italian counsel to do that. We are making sure that the US estate plan recognizes that there is a second will out there in Italy that only governs the Rome apartment and that everything else is governed by the US estate plan. So we coordinate those things. That's the cross-border piece of that.
And just to explain to everyone why that's so important is because it is a standard feature, if I understand it, of wills that they open by revoking all previous wills, right? And
Correct.
it's so easy. I mean, I guess you see this all the time. It's so easy for someone. When someone has a property in the UK, say, or Italy, say, oh, I've got my UK lawyer does that. And the UK lawyer just drafts the general out-the-box will, and it revokes all of the wills. And you've just unwittingly revoked your US estate plan.
Right. That's right. That's right. So I say that to clients all the time because they say that, oh, we'll just go to the same attorney who helped us buy the Rome apartment. And I go, hang on, and before they sign that will, I need to look at it. And before they sign the US will, the Italian attorney needs to look at it. Is there any kind of provision in there that goes against the law in the other country? So I just worked with a Danish US connection living in Denmark, but one US citizen and one non-US citizen, and spoke to Danish counsel there who was really good at kind of explaining all the different features. One of the things that came out of it was she said, Paula, you can't give an executor discretion over certain things. You can't do that in Denmark. Like, you just have to be very clear about what they can do and what they can't do. Because if they're seen as having too much discretion, and I'm not sure exactly what the, what the comparable explanation of that was. So I had to update certain provisions in the US will to take away the discretion, where we're all about discretion here, we're all about it and saying, well, pick the right person and they'll make the right decision. And it depends on the circumstances and the time frame and all that. We're like a little bit more loosey-goosey when it comes to things like that. Who would have thought? I know what I don't know. And I don't know what those little details are in Denmark that say, we can't have that in a will. Otherwise, there will be an effect here under Danish law. A negative effect under here.
You just can't know even close to everything. And like, as cross-border professionals, we know a lot more than most. But even then, that's why it's a team effort. It's always a team effort.
Yeah. Well, and their laws change just like our laws change, right? Right now, the UK is going through a huge overhaul of all of their taxes, right? Income, inheritance, all of that. And I think it takes effect April 1st, and yet whole provisions of that law are still not clear. So it's literally day to day. Did the guidance come out on the pensions yet under the new, UK law? And how does that work in the estate plan of the US UK clients I'm working with putting together a US plan? How are we going to deal with their UK pensions? Do I need to cover it in the US will? Does the UK will need to do it? Are they going to get pulled in? I don't know. Like, we're waiting for the guidance to come through.
Really? Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're referring to. Yeah. It's big changes.
Yeah. Yeah. Huge. That's like a sort of a historic overhaul, but there are little changes made every day, right? I mean, I get my daily updates every day on things that are going on in the US alone, certainly not on the, 200 other countries out there. So yes, we always use other counsel.
Back to the Italian couple. So, they're thinking of moving abroad. First thing is get an Italian will set up. What next?
So what we do is we would reach out to Italian counsel and say, okay, if they are going to be resident there, ideally, right, we're doing this all ahead, which these clients really are doing it ahead. So kudos to them. So we say to Italian counsel, okay, if they become resident there and they are under your program, which is the flat tax, what are the effects for the assets in Italy, the assets outside of Italy? What if they were to move their investment, their US investment account into Italy, for instance?
Uh-huh.
What would that do? How are there qualified retirement plans in the US that you can't move, right?
Uh-huh.
That they are where they are. I mean, they are organized under a provision of the Internal Revenue Code. They must be handled in a very certain way. Their custodian, must be a financial institution, all of that. So they're going to stay right where they are. How does Italy view that? So does Italy say, for instance, okay, we only for their any kind of inheritance or any kind of estate or even capital gain purposes, do they only tax assets that are within their borders that are considered Italian assets? Do they go beyond those borders? If an asset is coming from the US into Italy, let's say they take that investment account and they move it into Italy, is there a trigger of any kind when they do that in the US? So this concept of an exit tax is not just for individuals, it can be for assets as well.
Mm.
Hey, you're taking your asset and it's going past our border so that this country can no longer tax it because we have no basis on which to tax it. Well, at the border, guess what? We're going to tax it,
Uh-huh.
you know? So this concept of an exit tax is it shows up in a lot of different places. So these are all the questions we're going to ask Italian counsel to say, tell us what it looks like from the Italian side. We'll tell you what it looks like from a US side, and then we'll figure out the best way to do this so that things don't get triggered all over the place, you know? So, yeah, so we're probably gonna have an Italian will. Maybe, it will while they're not resident, it's gonna stick to that Rome apartment only. However, once they become resident, now the Italian will might be taking the lead instead because maybe all residents need to have a will governing all of the assets there. It's a question we have to ask. So, it was either Spain or Portugal, and I don't remember which one, but, one set of clients that I worked with, again, called up, dealt with these were US citizens living in another country, called that council, and that council said, "Oh, we bring everything into our inheritance tax, even not just within our borders, but everything. So we would actually take US assets and tax those as well." That surprised me because US is the only one really with the reputation that does that. And yet once in a while, that concept shows up other places. I'm glad I asked, right?
Uh-huh.
I would not be doing my job if I didn't. And so that plan in the other country was the one that was really taking the lead. I'm used to the US plan taking
Uh-huh.
the lead simply because we just go, smoking past our borders and tax everything and include everything. So that's generally what I'm used to. Once in a while, you bump up into a place that goes, "No, no, no, they're resident here, we're taxing everything that they own."
So the Italian couple, high earning, obviously thoughtful and conscientious because they're doing this in advance. I'm guessing,
Mhm.
therefore, they have an existing US estate plan.
Yes, sure.
And, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but there's certainly a lot of US people that incorporates trusts, especially living trusts. And
Yeah.
I know trusts are, I imagine it's very different country to country, but if you have trusts in place, or you're thinking of having trusts in place, how do American trusts interact with European countries?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is sometimes they interact just fine, but many, many times they don't interact well at all.
Mhm.
So one of the most important questions we have when doing any estate plan for someone with a non-US component to it. Look, it could even be US citizens, US residents. They have a kid who moved to Germany,
Mm.
and is living in Germany, right? So it's not even them, it's one of their future beneficiaries that has a non-US component. The question is, so if I'm gonna call them a plain vanilla US couple, right? If they come in, We're doing a U.S. estate plan. Sure. We love our trusts here. They're very
Uh-huh.
effective. They are tax planning, mechanisms to them. They are asset protection. If you want to make sure that your child's future ex-spouse never gets a hold of your money, a trust can make sure that that happens. We use them all over the place, and for various reasons. They avoid probate. They can protect beneficiaries from themselves. They can make sure that any government benefits or whatever are maintained, and that the beneficiary don't are is not rendered ineligible for said benefits. These are all different kinds of trusts that I'm describing. Okay. So, plain vanilla US couple comes in. Let's say their daughter lives in Germany. Well, what would happen if we just looked at the US issues and we said, "Oh, high net worth individuals, when both of you are gone, you're going to leave everything in a trust for the benefit of your daughter." All kinds of wonderful benefits as to what this kind of a trust does. They listen to all that. They say, "Great, sign us up. Definitely, put that in our estate plan." Problem. And what's the problem? Germany imposes an inheritance tax on literally an inheritance by someone living in Germany who receives an inheritance from someone. Germany steps in and says, "Thank you very much. We will take X% of that." Okay. Here's what makes it worse. Germany doesn't really recognize trusts. They have something called a Usufruct, but they do not really recognize trusts. Okay. So you can wind up losing, no lie, between 50 and 70% in German taxation.
Wait, just German?
Just German.
So,
Just German. Yeah.
wow. Wait, so
So
you've
if I were to
wow.
do that for that couple and never, consult German counsel, and I set up a trust and, mom and dad pass away and everything goes in trust to daughter resident in Germany, she can lose between 50 and 70% of that trust. It goes away to Germany
Oh,
in the
man.
form of tax.
This is gonna happen so much because
So
more
much.
and
Yep.
more kids are moving abroad, and
Yes.
90
Yes.
per domestic this is just not gonna it's less of an issue now with these changes in the UK, but living trusts were a massive
Mhm.
problem for Brits, and
Right.
I can't tell you the amount of clients who had living trusts when they shouldn't have had living trusts because they walk
Yep.
past a regular estate planner's attorney's office, and they just throw a living trust at you. It's just estate planning
Sure.
101.
Yep.
Uh, that is oh,
Yep.
wow. You need to put that on a billboard somewhere and just in, like, New
Yeah.
York or something, just 'cause that is gonna oh, that's awful if that happens. So this is not just
The
for people looking to move away. This is if you've got anyone connected to your estate
Yeah.
plan outside the US.
Right. And I agree with you. I would say sort of a new trend also is, so maybe mom and dad aren't making the move,
Yeah.
to Europe, but son and daughter certainly are in a way that previous generations have not, you know? So these, mom and dad are now having grandchildren being born abroad who may not be US people, you know, but they're in another country. Absolutely. This concept of trust really is it is absolutely US. I mean, and anyone, when I go to that conference and I'm standing around with attorneys from 40 other countries, they always say, "You US people, you love your trusts." I
Mm.
go, "Oh, we do. We do." Because there's all kinds of wonderful benefits for them. But the taxation, I'm gonna say Netherlands, same thing, very, very high taxation on trusts. They don't really, they'll kinda look through them, but they'll actually sort of penalize you. If you're resident in France, you should not be beneficiary of a US trust. That's another one. Resident in France. You can be a French citizen, but don't be resident in France. And, I have a client who the children are French citizens. They are all living in Florida right now. And we went ahead and did things on the understanding that if they had no plans of being resident in France, they were kind of born and raised in the US, they're not interested in moving to France, but if they change their mind because life changes,
Things change.
we cannot have their trusts, for them if they're resident in France.
So if you have an estate plan and there are trusts, you might have to
Mhm.
unwind them before you leave?
Yes. So a lot of people are having the estate plan and the trusts are under them, meaning that they're not necessarily created yet, right? So
Hmm.
if someone has a will or even a revocable trust and it says, at my death do this and then, at the surviving spouse's death, that's when the trusts are created. If that's what you have, then you just need to update your estate plan, right? Because those trusts for the children or whoever else are not actually in existence yet. The plan to set them up is
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
but they're
yeah.
not actually done. However, yes, we also have clients who they already have. They've created a standalone trust. They've funded it during their lifetime as part of their estate planning. They've made gifts, whether it's to a spouse in some form or to children. And then a big area of practice is either moving trusts, domestication of trusts, or unwinding of trusts before someone gets to a new jurisdiction.
And I'm right in thinking if you don't do this, if you wake up in one of these countries and you listen to the podcast, you think, "Oh crikey, I should have. I'll find out." And
Yeah.
you unwinding it as a already resident in this other country, that can have
Yeah.
presumably that can have consequences.
It can have consequences, yes, but you're still gonna do it,
Yeah.
you're still gonna say, "Okay, what's all right, I've got this trust, I've got a resident in another country, what do I do about this? I need to fix it." Yeah, and it could be unwinding a trust. Sometimes under US law, you can't unwind a trust, right? It's irrevocable. That was kind of the whole point,
Yeah, yeah.
of the plan was that you gave something
Yeah.
away into a trust entity that no one has control over because it's the trust.
So what do you do then?
Um, so then you've gotta look at your options. It really depends on what other country are you dealing with, at that point.
Wow.
How can you minimize the tax in that country? How can you work around it? Can you,
And Paula, could that lead to a
undo it in some
situation
way?
where, let's say someone has an irrevocable trust, and they've got their heart set on country A, could it be they have a meeting with you before and you say, "Look, you can do that, but you just need to know this trust is gonna be, punitively taxed here. Have you considered country B or country C?"
Yes, absolutely. So there's a reason why there's lots of trust companies in a lot of what we used to call offshore jurisdictions here in the US, but there are jurisdictions throughout the world that their whole one of their main sources of revenue is serving as a jurisdiction where people can put their money in trust. Okay, so, like the Caymans or Bahamas or something like that. I a lot of it tends to be smaller islands because their revenue is tourism, and they needed something other than tourism, and so they got into the financial services industry, and it has been very successful for them. Other states, smaller states without too much else going on revenue-wise have also got into it. Small state of Delaware, although they always had a good corporate, business going. South Dakota, Wyoming, Nevada, those things, they are trying to bring money to those jurisdictions to say, "Well, we have certain trust laws that are kind of very friendly." So, let's talk about the non-US jurisdiction, obviously, because we're talking on a global scale, but it could be that someone says, "Okay, look, I've got beneficiaries in France. I still wanna set up a trust for them." Right? There's all these reasons to do it, and I just don't wanna give things outright. Where else can I put the money? And you might go jurisdiction shopping. You
Outside
might
the
say, "Well,
US?
maybe." Yeah, absolutely.
It
Yeah.
never occurred to me that an American would intentionally set up a offshore and okay, of course, yeah.
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
know why it never occurred to me,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah. So you could say, "I'm gonna put my" and I'm using these jurisdictions as purely as examples. I'm not saying this is a solution for a French resident, but we would look at that and we would go, okay, U.S. creator. Let's go to the Channel Islands. Let's go to Jersey or Guernsey, whatever. These are jurisdictions that specialize in this business.
Mhm.
What if I were to set up a trust in Jersey and put the money there? What would the effect be on my French resident? Right? Not a US trust, but we're putting it there. What about a Liechtenstein foundation, right? So there's
Right.
other jurisdictions that they call it foundation. Here, when we hear foundation, we think it's a charitable
Yeah.
foundation, but that's not what that means. So Liechtenstein Foundation, Panamanian Foundation, these are very similar structures to trusts. They kind of look like a trust and act like a trust, but they're called foundation in their particular jurisdiction. They serve a lot of the same purposes, and they could be friendlier to the beneficiaries who are living in other countries in Europe. that would
Got it.
otherwise, like, tax the heck out of them.
There are options. It's
There are
planning.
options. There are options, yeah. Wherever there's a need, people set up a business around it, right? You
Hmm.
know? That's what other jurisdictions got into the business of. They raised their hand and they said, "Well, we'll take it."
Hmm.
You know? "We'll do it. They'll tax the heck out of you. We'll take it instead." And we change our laws to make it so that we don't tax it, you know? So
Uh, is there anything else that you think that immediately springs to mind that people who are doing this should, from an estate planning perspective, or not, based on your experience working with people who are doing this, that people should be thinking of, um, should do in advance?
yeah, so one other kind of illustration I just wanna throw out there is, if people are leaving the US and if these people were green card holders before, right, not citizens, or, even if they're citizens, but let's say they are either giving up the citizenship or more likely, more commonly, someone with a green card who goes, "Okay, yeah, I'm gonna leave the US, like, I'm retired, our family is someplace else, we're gonna kinda make the move," you know? And so they decide that the green card is gonna go. So they may be, um, considered once they're so if they're not a covered expatriate, which I won't get into all that
Hmm.
because that's kind of a whole other area, but let's say that someone kind of winds up, living outside the US, they no longer have, US they're not a US resident, they're not a US citizen. One of the big differences of those people is that, if they own any US situs property, and this includes stock in a US corporation. So let's say they sold the house, right? They got rid of the US house, everything, but they left their retirement plan because they don't really have a choice. It's kind of
Hmm.
has to stay where it is. And they're not going to withdraw from it. Let's say they keep their investment account because it's been doing really well. And in there, they have their 100 shares of Disney Corporation, right? Stock in a US corporation. What a lot of people don't realize is that when you are a non US resident, non citizen, you don't have that huge exemption amount for the federal estate tax. You only have a $60,000 exemption amount, which has been on the books for probably 50 years. It is not indexed for inflation. That number does not change each year. It probably, when it was first put on the books, 60,000 was a big number.
Mm.
It's not now. And so what a lot of what we're seeing is people, die, they are owning US situs property
Mm.
that is subject to US federal estate tax, and they have no idea until they try to transfer the assets out of that investment account in the US and put it the beneficiaries try to get it into their own accounts, and that financial institution says, not so fast. You owe federal estate tax on this, and we need a federal transfer certificate, the thing that says that we're all clear for tax purposes before we let you have access to these funds.
You can lose 40% of it over $60,000.
40%. That's right.
Paula, this is a big deal because there's like armies of advisors at the wirehouses right now who are trying to recruit clients to invest in the US, saying it's like it's more safe,
Right.
more secure, which it is. Cheaper, more safe, more secure, more options. Yes, 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 yes. But I bet you they're
Yep.
not saying, oh yeah, by the way, but if you die here, oh sorry, if you die while this money's here, you can wave
Right.
goodbye to 40% of it.
Right. Right. That's right. And I speak to a lot of financial planners on exactly this topic just to wave the flag and be like, again, you can still have your US investments because they are good. We have a lot of people all over the world that say they want to diversify, their funds. And one of the ways people diversify is by investing in different countries, having different investment accounts in different countries of different companies, all good. And that is increasing, right? That's just as time goes
Hmm.
on, more and more and more and more people are going to do that. But here's what you need to know. If you have US situs property, you only have a 60,000 exemption amount as a non-US person. Can planning be done? Absolutely. So right now, this week, I'm working with two Australians. They were living in the US for a while, enough to set up a 401k plan through their employer and an investment account, and they worked for US companies and they received stock from those companies, which they want to hang on to. They worked for the companies. It's a good investment. They know it. They don't want to get rid of it. I understand that. They don't have to, but we need to do some planning because they're no longer US people and they're not, and they're going to be subject to federal estate tax if they are still holding those in their own name at the time of their death. Fortunately, they're young. We always check treaty provisions, and it just so happens that Australia, there's a very helpful treaty position,
Mhm, mhm.
but there's very few treaties out there for this. But if they were someplace else, we would be looking at, are we setting up an entity of some kind and moving that stock into that
Oh,
entity?
really? So there
They
are
can still keep
solutions?
the investment. There are
Okay,
solutions. Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
because talking about treaties, there's loads of income tax treaties, but if we're looking at estate,
Right.
there's a fraction. There's like 18 or something. Am I right? I've
I think there's 16 in force right now, yes,
so
and
hardly any.
sometimes they sort of give us something different and
Uh-huh.
sometimes they don't. Australia actually does. There's some good gimmies
Oh,
in
that's good
there.
to know.
There's some good stuff in the German one. Very kinda generous, as far as affording, exemptions amount to non-US people or whatever.
Just
It's in
don't
the
do a
treaty.
trust.
That's great.
Mhm.
Just don't
No
do a
trusts.
trust. Yeah, no
Paula,
trusts.
Paula, this has been great. Paula, I think the message here is just don't do this on your own. Don't do this with a professional who isn't in the cross border space because
Right.
there's just so much to know, and planning is
Mhm.
critical.
Yeah.
Avoid the landmines. Don't detonate them in the first place. But if you do step on one, extricate yourself. But just you need. I say this all the time. You need a good team around you. You need a good cross
Yeah.
border financial, tax, and
Yeah.
estate, and you need them to be communicating.
Yes, yes. Always, always is that we're gonna bring in when a client comes to me, uh, do they have a good accountant who understands the international? Do they have a financial planner if they have one who understands the cross-border? Um, uh, you know, the immigration attorney, for me, that's part of the team.
Mhm.
We need to know if we're shifting that around, what are we actually doing? What's the landscape? Because that changes all the time. Yeah, we absolutely wanna weigh in with everyone and say, what are the consequences of anything? It's a little bit like a Rubik's Cube, right? If you move one part of the Rubik's Cube, it moves other things.
Totally.
And you need to have those other advisors around to say, "What am I moving here?" You know?
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It's just like that. That's exactly what it's like. Yeah, I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm also
I'm
going to
glad you
take the
know what a
Google one.
Rubik's Cube is.
Yes. Yeah. I've never completed one. Although I reckon now you just have to watch a YouTube video, but I've never
There you
succeeded.
go.
It's been great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Paula. Where can people find
Thank
you?
you. People can find me. My website is jonesestategroup.com. You can email me. Email is the best way to get a hold of me. Paula at jonesestategroup.com. And yeah, just shoot me an email if you need some help or whatever. I'm happy to work with people. And if I can't work with people, I am tapped into a very good network. So I can certainly hand off people if they're not in a jurisdiction that I work with, or if they need I just had a client ask me, Give me a good accountant who knows cross-border stuff," and I gave out a name there. So if we're in the network, we'll find the right people
I think that's one of our
for
most
people.
valuable resources now is our
Yeah.
networks. Because you and I
Yes.
plug the Venn diagram of our network overlaps somewhat.
Yes. Yeah.
And the longer I do this, the more I value those relationships, and just knowing these people and having access to them is invaluable.
Yeah.
Paula, thank you so much for being on Move to Europe.
Thank you so much.
Cheers. See you soon.